Shout out to Tracy Wilkins. She did a report on the fact that HBCUs are experiencing a near record surge in enrollment. While some traditional universities are experiencing declines, many historical Black colleges are having an enrollment boom. And this actually is happening at one of my alma maters as well, at Bowie State University.
Go Bulldogs!
Yeah, Bowie State is expecting an 8% increase overall in enrollment this fall. And I do remember going to Bowie State recently and being stunned at the new upgrades and the new buildings and new programs going on. Howard University has had more than a 15% enrollment increase last year, and during the pandemic. And coincidentally, it's motivated by a lot of new freshmen interested in political justice and law, and doing a lot of law majors and political science majors, and getting other advanced other degrees and other advanced programs. And of course, them being motivated by the successes of other alums like Kamala Harris and of course Chadwick Boseman was a big motivator for that as well. As a matter of fact, and also HBCUs have been recipients of many rather large donations. Bowie State got $25 million alone after being historically underfunded by the state of Maryland. So I do find this very interesting on many levels. Because I remember I'll never forget the surge of HBCUs back in the 90s, partially propelled by Bill Cosby and the Different World franchise, coincidentally. We remember all the hype we had on the around the hoodies and everything, and all the pride we took, and but what's going on now, it's a little different now. It seems like people are motivated. It seems like these young people are motivated on a different level joining HBCUs. I do also have some more critical questions on the makeup of this new enrollment as well. But it is interesting that HBCUs are receiving this kind of attention financially. But what do you guys think?
Go ahead, Al.
Hey, listen, man.
You about to be pessimist again, man?
No.
You just can't help yourself.
I
just
think
can't help yourself.
It's not surprising that HBCUs are seeing a boom in enrollment. This is very similar to what we saw during the height or towards the end of the civil rights movement. There was a great number of Black students who were looking to go to HBCUs to reconnect with their Blackness, and not only that, but to be in quote unquote safe spaces. So it's not surprising. I think it's fascinating that HBCUs have not gotten the bulk of our admissions from our community. I've always found that as a strange phenomenon, but I have some theories of why that's the way it is. But it's not surprising. I think
delving on that.
Well, I think for one, we've been conditioned, and not only conditioned, but we've seen the tangible effects that white folks have always had the resources and the ability to create educational environments where their children were able to get a different type of education, and honestly a better education than Black students got. So it made sense that after Brown versus Board of Education, which many of us argued against, that Black folks would try to get in those white spaces, not because we wanted to be near white folks. It's never, I believe, was about desiring to be near whiteness. I think that we were trying to get the same level of resources or the same benefits from resources as they got. And I think that's the same thing that we do now. We have such a high and large affinity for all these white ass Ivy League schools that every time you turn around, they have some sort of racial incident or some sort of connection to white supremacy, that it blows my mind that we don't send our kids to the Black version of these Ivy League schools, the Howards, the Spelmans, all these. But at the same time, send your kids to schools to get education. Don't send your kids to these schools to get radicalized. Because again, a lot of these HBCUs are not doing that. But again, the fact that we don't go to them a lot or more than we do, I find fascinating. I also find disturbing, particularly our Black athletes. Imagine what
transitioned away from that. Yeah.
Yeah, and remember, there was a time where you can look at NFL and NBA, and you had countless HBCU athletes in there who were stars.
Yep.
I plan to actually, when I pursue my master's, is to find an HBCU to get my master's degree from, because I want to get that experience from being at a HBCU.
I can dig it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was interesting as I started to look into this was the ties, but two things that I thought was fascinating. One, especially within the past 4 years or 5 years, I should say, as hate crimes have begun to increase in these smaller cities, the number of enrollment for HBCUs has also increased. And there was a study actually done that was published in June of this year that showed from 1994 to 2018, as African Americans and people of color have seen an increase in hate crimes within their small cities and suburbs, that the number of enrollments for HBCUs has been on a steady increase. I thought that was very fascinating.
Interesting.
The second part is that the number of white or non-Black enrollees at HBCUs has also begun to take an increase.
Yeah.
Why? Because what they've realized is that they're getting equal to or adequate education, secondary education, but at a cheaper cost. So they'll forego going to University of Maryland and go to not Towson. They'll go to Morgan, or they'll
Morgan
go to
State.
Bowie State.
Yeah.
Or they'll go to Morgan State, or they'll go to Bowie State, because they know that
Yeah.
they're going to get the education they're looking for in their field and at a cheaper cost than it would cost for them to go to University of Maryland, or to go to Johns Hopkins, or to go to one of these other local big colleges and universities.
Right.
So I think that's one of the things that's being left out of this argument. What is the percentage, as these enrollments are going up, what is the percentage of non-Black enrollees that are
that
going
was
into
my
schools?
primary question, about this surge, because not that I did not have, because my college experience was all Black, hands down. Bowie State to Howard. You know what I'm saying? No. As a matter of fact, from high school through college and undergrad, it's been all Black. Only time that I kind of deviated was in elementary school. But yeah, I did find it curious sometimes when I did have, not that I objected, but I did realize what bothered me instinctively about seeing them, in my freshman class, my freshman year, my sophomore year. I'm like, I think I know a guy that should have had your spot.
Yep.
I think I know a guy that should have had your spot. And I think your parents can afford Maryland. They're just being cheap. Or they're forgetting that they're white. And that they can ask the state to send their white child to their state school.
Interesting.
They can ask. They can ask the state. My parents can't ask the state to send my Jamaican Guyanese ass to their school, but they can ask.
For me, when I went to Bowie, it wasn't even like that. I didn't see any white kids during the daytime. It wasn't until I started really
the night
no
school.
bullshit.
It wasn't until I started
really working.
Programs
and I did class in the evenings, man. I would go to school at night, and it was nothing but folks that were like in their late 20s, early 30s, or those folks trying to get back into school. A large portion of them were white, and I thought it was fascinating.
And remember, those night school courses weren't cheaper to us.
No,
but for them.
I think it's also fascinating how welcome we are to white folks onto Black campuses. Like,
but Black people have been historically always far more welcome.
No. And I just find that fascinating, because when we go to predominantly white campuses,
there's always a pushback.
Always some shit.
Always a pushback. Let's not forget that, what was it, 3-4 years ago now, that there was a a racial stabbing at University of Maryland on the campus.
Oh,
Dude stabbed a young man who was a Army reservist. I forget the brother's name. Stabbed
Yeah,
him there.
I remember that.
Towson. There was an organization created out Towson to essentially protect white students. And the school apparently said they couldn't do anything because it was a club that they had to. Anyway, but they created an
They can't.
organization that helped patrol Towson campus to make sure the students were safe. Anyway,
And
like I said,
all
we're
the people who
always
was on the
horrible
damn
welcome.
organization should have been smacked in the damn face.
Yeah, no bullshit. But I think
What
it's
you mean
sometimes
you in an
it is,
organization to protect white folks? If you don't get the sit the fuck down somewhere.
it's always, and what's interesting to me is that the inclusion of white people in black spaces ultimately always ends up being to our detriment. Either they end up
Always.
poisoning the well, like with
Always.
in terms of the information that we disseminate amongst ourselves,
Always.
or in terms of just proximity, people getting hurt.
Yeah,
Like
always.
it's disturbing. It's disturbing simply because far too often you get lambasted by the American public at large and some black people about how love and understanding and dialogue is what's going to rectify the relationship between black and white people.
I tell you, one of the most heartbreaking stories is the story of the black woman a couple years ago who went to the sleepover with the white women, and she was killed at the sleepover. Yeah, her son was a member of the football team or they or something, but she went to an overnight sleepover with some white woman, and she was killed at this sleepover, and it turned into this thing where it was accidental. It was so incredibly creepy, and I'm so angry at myself that I can't remember the sister's name. But I use that as an example that I don't think it's wise for black folks to put ourselves in those type of situations. I just don't think it typically doesn't turn out well for us. And I know being murdered might be the extreme.
Right? I get it.
But damn it, bruh, if you're the only one, you probably shouldn't be the only one.
I think one of the biggest challenges that these HBCUs have, because I think at the end of 2019, there was already a steady increase in terms of the number of enrollees. And of course, after George Floyd, that thing really blew up. One of the bigger questions was really whether or not these HBCUs, because of their underfunding, would be able to handle the influx of new enrollees. Do you think that this is a turning point, a renaissance, if you will, for black education in America? Or do you think it's just a blip on the timeline?
We shall see.
We'll see, man.
You don't have high hopes? Neither one of you have high hopes?
No, I don't.
I do. I remember the dire straits that Howard was in the early 2000s and the late 90s. You know, some of that prestige was getting a little rusty around the edges, and the numbers weren't looking good on the graduation front. The alumni weren't being as loyal, and I can personally attest to that.
Yeah, they just had a thing there recently where a bunch of students decided that they were going on they moved out of the dorm. They were doing some sort of strike or protest because of the living arrangement.
Yeah, I mean some of the nastier things were just definitely around the leadership at Howard for many years.
Yeah.
It was and only recently have they begun to kind of shake some of that off. But the glory days of what Howard had in terms of reputation and cultural cachet, it's definitely not the same. They're definitely still in a rebuilding phase, and one of the biggest indicators is still definitely their homecoming, but definitely the lack of certain programs and movements they were proud to be a part of at one time in the late 90s.
Not a part
And
of
they're
it
like,
anymore.
nah, they ain't part of shit no more. And now they have to rebuild all these relationships with all these different cultural institutions because at one point they said, we want to be this, we're trying to catch up. Whatever. But
I will say this before
went through a big change too.
Yeah, I'll give you that.